So I'd like to thank the Capital City Country Club for doing such a nice job with our lunch this morning, and in particular our board member Chris Sullivan for putting all the program information together and getting us all together like this. I'd also like to thank Thais Wilson, who came today from DOT to be our videographer. For those of you who have missed an event or two in the past, you can go online to the Association's Florida chapter website and look at the information that's been presented by our past speakers. So if we can have a round of appreciation for all of them. All right, so first in our program, before we get started with our guest speaker today, I'd like to introduce to you the Governor's Chief Inspector General and the President of the National Association of Inspectors General to tell us a little bit about what's going on from the national perspective, unless you were going somewhere else.
I was just going to turn the music off, but somebody magically that happened. So, well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see such a large turnout for one of our fantastic speakers. But I have a couple things I'd like to bring to your attention and point out to you today, if you don't mind. And first, I'd like to start off with recognition of 4 of Florida chapter members who are certified in Austin. If you would please stand, Chris Sullivan. Robert Luncheon, I don't believe is here. Mike Tolstrup. Chris, Robert, and Mike were certified as the Certified Inspector General out in Austin, so congratulations to you. And then also Jared Deason. Jared Deason. Congratulations, Jared. Jared is our Kirby Mole Scholarship recipient and just recently was certified as the Certified Inspector General Auditor. Congratulations. We look like we're going to be negotiating with the Hyatt Riverfront Hotel, which is where we had some of the institutes in the past, for the week of August the 19th. So we're real excited about that. The 3rd Vice President for the National Association of Inspectors General is Bob Clift, and he's also the Chair of the Certification Board, and he does a phenomenal job. He led the certification and institutes out in Austin, and if you guys would give him a round of applause as well, I want to thank him for all of his hard work. Bob does a tremendous amount of work for the Association of Inspectors General, and I really appreciate all of his work. Okay, I think that's pretty much all I have to cover today, and if I can turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. Let's see, Chuck, could you come up and give us an update on the next round of scholarships, please?
Thanks, Bob, and we're glad to see that Jared became certified. He was our first recipient of a Kirby Mole Scholarship. We'll be putting together within the next month and getting it out to you the applications for the scholarship for the Jacksonville Institutes. We awarded a CIG auditor last time. We'll be looking to award a CIG investigator scholarship for Jacksonville. So I would encourage all of you IGs to speak to your investigators that are not certified. Please apply. We will be doing some modifications to the application process. I'm going to be working with Chris Sullivan to put together a PDF that we can get it out to you using the constant contact system that we're using to schedule these meetings. You'll also be able to apply and will be able to track Mole scholarship applications as we go forward in time. We do think the program's gotten off to a rousing success, and we certainly ask anybody who's interested to please apply, and you can certainly contact me or Bob if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, and so one further note on the scholarship. In order to be eligible to receive the scholarship, you have to be eligible to attend the training. And so if you're interested in whether or not you meet eligibility criteria to go to the Institute, you can look at that on the Association of Inspectors General website. There's an Institute page, and just check the criteria there. Once you know you're eligible, then you can apply for the scholarship. And so, Jeff Beasley, who's a board member and the Inspector General in the Department of Corrections, is going to talk to you about some summer training initiatives.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are heavily involved in the planning process, or the planning stages, for our summer training event that the chapter has been holding for the past few years. And one of the things that I need from you as our membership is, a few days ago, you should have received an email survey, an electronic survey that asked just a handful of questions about some of your training interest and some miscellaneous information that would really be valuable as we finalize that planning. Again, we are looking to have that training session in July. The plans this year, as it looks preliminary anyway, is to hold a training session here in Tallahassee and a separate session somewhere else in the state, central to South Florida area. But the information that you provide in that survey is really critical, especially as we look at the type of training or some of the instructors that we may want to invite to participate in that training. And again, this is, I view this as a service for the membership. So certainly your input into that training is critical, because as with anything else in life, you're certainly going to get out of it kind of the things that you put in it. And we definitely want to make sure that we're meeting the needs and the interest of the membership of the chapter. So if you have not responded to that survey, or for some reason you did not get that survey sent to you, please let me know, and we will certainly give you that opportunity. I know preliminarily we've looked at some of the responses, and there's some great information in there, and already I'm looking forward to sort of building the training around some of our needs. So very excited about that. And again, you'll see some more information on that in the next couple weeks. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And so now our board member and treasurer, Jerry Chestnut. Maybe Jerry can give us a quick update on the status of our treasury.
Yeah, the first quarter of the year is always kind of a busy year, or a busy time. We've got the corporate annual report that's been filed as the 990, and we have right now 22, as of the end of March, we have $22,910. So things are well.
Thank you, Jerry. Would anybody like to announce any promotions in their offices or new hires? All right, well, if there's no promotions, what about any vacancies? Anybody advertising? Chris?
Well, I'll give you a promotion and a vacancy. We have 3 sections in the OIG's Office of Transportation. We just promoted Joe Gilboy to Deputy Audit Director and over the Performance IT Audit section, which leaves a vacancy for a manager position, excuse me, for our intermodal section. There's 7 staff in that section. Salary range is around $65,000. So that should be out on People First and within next week. If you have any questions, just see me.
Okay, well, seeing no other hands. Oh, Melinda?
I don't have a vacancy to announce, but I do have somebody that I would like to draw attention to, if you wouldn't mind. Would you mind standing, Heather? Everybody who works with Heather Robinson in the Chief Inspector General's office, I just want to point her out and thank her for all of her hard work. She does a tremendous job in our office, and I know many of you talk to her on the phone, and so I just wanted to acknowledge her publicly so that you would know who she is, because I know many of you have become really good friends with her over the telephone and not necessarily yet in person. So welcome to you. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I'm so glad that you're part of our office.
All right, thank you, Melinda. And so, the Association of Inspectors General Florida chapter is only one of several professional associations here in town. I know that we have people here who are also members of IIA and AGA and whatnot. Does anybody want to address any other professional opportunities coming up in town from either of those groups?
The Association of Government Accountants will be having a Certified Financial Government Manager training course May 8th through 10th. It allows you 24 hours of, well, more than that, of CPE, and you can go to the AGA, TallahasseeAGA.org website and register. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, great, Frank, go ahead.
Hi, the Tallahassee chapter of the IIA has a workshop coming up. It's geared toward report writing. We have Joanne Fearman coming into town to provide 7 CPE hours. This is going to be held on April 26th from 8:30 to 5. I think we have a capacity of 75 attendees, and we are at 70 right now. If you have questions, please, oh, excuse me, I'm trying to preserve the tie. If you have questions, you can either contact me directly through President 103 at iiachapter.org or check our local IIA website. I believe the member cost is $75 and the non-member cost is $100 for 7C 80 hours. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Frank. Any other hands? All right, so maybe I could reintroduce Jeff Beasley to give us an introduction for our guest speaker.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you and good afternoon again. It certainly gives me great pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker for today's luncheon. He probably needs very little introduction for most of us in the room, but Ken Tucker is graciously accepted the opportunity to come and talk to us today. For those of you that are not familiar with Mr. Tucker, he is a dedicated and true professional to the extent of beginning his career serving his country, as many have in the U.S. Army some 30-plus years ago. After a service or a stint in the U.S. Army, he joined the Daytona Beach Police Department, where he served there as a police officer. Once leaving the police department, he joined the ranks of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, where he began as a special agent and worked up to the position of assistant commissioner, at which time Governor Scott asked Mr. Tucker to come over and serve as the secretary for the Department of Corrections. Mr. Tucker came over and served in that position for about 18 months until his drop time had ended, and has now accepted a position here with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Florida as the law enforcement coordinator for this district. So again, for me personally, it gives me a lot of pleasure. Again, a true professional and someone for me personally has been an inspiration and a mentor since coming here to Florida. So without further ado, Mr. Tucker.
As you get older, you learn not to rely on your mind to remember everything you want to say, so you make good notes. Another good tip is don't feed a 60-year-old and then ask him to give a speech. It's about nap time. So. Well, let me begin by saying thank you, Bob and Chris, for inviting me here today. You know, I was driving over and I was thinking, if someone had told me probably even 15 years ago that I'd be standing before a group of inspector generals giving a speech, I would have probably told them they were out of their mind. I want to thank Jeff for the introduction. Don't even do his evaluation anymore and he still speaks highly of me, so that's always a good sign. You know, as I look around the room, I see a lot of my old friends, a lot of familiar faces. Well, in all fairness, Al Dennis is the only old one of the group, but everybody else. He knew I had to do something. So. You know, when Chris called me and asked me to speak here today, I agreed, and then after I got off the phone, I'm like, well, what am I going to talk about? You know, and of course, he got me to agree, and then he said, well, we need you to talk for 50 minutes. And I told him, I said, there's going to be a lot of more people if I try to talk for 50 minutes. So, so I got good news and bad news. I'm not going to talk for 50 minutes, and I'm not going to talk for 50 minutes. So, you know, as I did think about it, I thought, well, probably a good way to start out, you know, because you know how you perceive yourself as an inspector general, but do you know how everyone else perceives you? And I started thinking back. When I was brand new with the state of Florida, I was a special agent assigned to one of our field offices. And, you know, here comes this group, Inspector General, and they do an audit, and then they give us all these lists of things that I've done wrong. Well, as a special agent, my thought is, I'm trying to put bad guys in jail, and you're bothering me with all these little tiny rule violations. You know, they're getting in my way of putting people in jail. I meant to do it right. I just made a mistake. So, you know, I went on, had another audit, and this is one of the stories I love to tell, and I still have a keepsake from this story. FDLE has something called information and evidence. It's buy money for undercover investigations, source of payments, and stuff like that. Well, I was working a case, and we ran out of cassette tapes, so I took that buy money and I went and bought some cassette tapes. Well, here comes an audit, and they said, that's an unauthorized expenditure. You should have used petty cash. So I had to write all these memos, and again, my thought is, I just did what I needed to do my job. But my favorite story is I had withdrawn some of this I&E money. That's what we call it for short, information and evidence. And I'd spent everything, and I went to the bank and I redeposited the balance. I filled out all the paperwork, and I was trying to obey the rules. In my math, I miscalculated, and I put 1 penny too much back into the account. They pointed out to me. I said, well, just give me my penny back. Oh, it's not that easy. I said, well, just keep the penny. I can't do that either. So, after a number of memorandums, probably which cost the state several $100s, we finally got that issue resolved. So I figured out you were better off to deposit too little than deposit too much. Of course, then they would have thought I was trying to steal a penny if I'd have put too little in. So, the point I'm trying to make, at the operational base level of the agency, I didn't understand what the IG was all about. I didn't understand the role it played. I just understood what I was supposed to be doing and how I was trying to do it to the best of my ability, and I couldn't possibly know all these rules and regulations, in my day-to-day activities all the time. So I move on, and I make that point because I think that's one area each of you need to realize is a lot of those at that level, they don't understand what your role is. They don't understand why you do what you do. Move on to my career as a mid-level manager. At this point, I figured out, okay, I've got to figure out how to address this. It's here, it's not going away. I've got to figure out how to comply with all the requirements and do the things the IG's office wants. So I developed a mentality that, well, actually my experience had taught me as auditors, you're going to keep digging till you find something wrong. And it gets better. It's not all that bad, but I'm describing my maturation process to what I think today. But as I started looking, and we'd get ready for an audit, I was in charge of a small field office, and I said, well, let's leave some obvious things right up top here so they'll find them and they won't dig any further and everybody will go home. Well, not only did they find those, they went on and dug deeper and found all the other things that I didn't know about. So that strategy didn't work out well for me either. So I figured out, well, I still got some learning to do in figuring this out. And obviously at this point, even as a mid-level manager, I wasn't real clear on what exactly the IG meant to me or to the agency as a whole. Many times just thought it was a group of people that, just enjoyed finding all the mistakes I'd made. So now, Al could probably tell many of these stories, but fast forward, I'm now the Assistant Commissioner of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And one thing you learn about, FDLE as a member there, they take great pride at that agency in their reputation as an agency. Their reputation for integrity, their reputation for doing the right things for the right reasons, their reputation for professionalism. In my role as Assistant Commissioner, I've now started seeing that reputation didn't happen by accident. It didn't just, everybody just professed it and it became true. And then Mike McCarg was our IG at the time, and they had done an audit, and we're going over the results, and I'm starting to question some of them, and this was kind of an aha moment for me because Mike McCarg pointed out something I'd never really thought of. Because I'm complaining about some of his findings, and he's like, look, here are the policies, the procedures, the rules. We simply look to make sure you're following those. He said, but more importantly, you're the one that writes the rules. And our job is only to follow and do audits and look at things to make sure you're in compliance. So at that point I'm thinking, you know, he's right. In my time at FDLE, I had either fortune or misfortune to be involved in a lot of different committees. I chaired the report writing committee. I was the chair of FDLE's investigative strategy committee. And a lot of the things that were being pointed out as violations, he was absolutely right. I had played a role in writing those. So that kind of got me on the right track. I now started realizing that the IG was there to protect the reputation of the agency, to maintain that trust of the public and everybody else that needed to trust that we were doing the things we were supposed to be doing. Also in my role at FDLE, I had a lot of opportunity to interact with those outside of, with other state agencies. Some of those through governor's ordered investigations, but many of those through referrals by many of you on criminal matters that FDLE was asked to investigate. And I know that capacity, a lot of you now have that capacity within your own organization, but there was a time when FDLE pretty much inherited a lot of those things, and I see Rick Lober and his role in our executive investigations got involved in a lot of those as well. But one of those interactions was between FDLE and an agency that years later I would become the secretary of. I was the special agent in charge of our Jacksonville office for FDLE. And it was late summer of 1999, and got a call that an inmate had died in custody at Florida State Prison. That call resulted in spending a long, hot summer. I think Rick visited a few times, many others visited a few times, but the allegation was that a group of correctional officers had beaten to death a death row inmate. Frank Valdez was the inmate's name. Probably one of the most frustrating investigations I was ever involved in my life. And you know, and I don't want to paint DOC in a bad light, but that particular instance, they were not forthright in coming forward with the information. That's an understatement, right? So, and you know, it shows how your interactions early, later on, you'll have a continuation of them. The warden of Florida State Prison at that time was a guy named Jimmy Crosby. Anybody know who Jimmy Crosby is? It was kind of funny because, you know, that years later I'm the assistant commissioner at FDLE. I get a call that the governor is considering appointing Jimmy Crosby as the secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. And they wanted to know what I thought. And I said, I think somebody's crazy. I said, the guy is a crook. I said, he interfered with our investigation every step of the way. And they said, well, do you have any proof of that? And I said, no. If I did, he would have been in prison before now. I said, but my years of experience tell me he's a crook. Well, they ignored my counsel and they appointed him Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections, and the rest is history. Now, what I learned there, probably specifically from that investigation, when you go a period of time and you're ignoring those details, when you're ignoring that little stuff, when you're not paying attention to those things, they get bigger and bigger and bigger till you end up with something like this. That was an embarrassment to the state of Florida. And I'll be honest, to this day, I think it still remains an embarrassment. I mean, Frank Valdez was a bad guy. Don't get me wrong. He was in prison for killing a correctional officer while trying to break somebody out of jail. But it wasn't their role to implement that death penalty. I think the The version we got was he continuously climbed up the cell and dove off head first into the floor. And part of the evidence we were able to retrieve was we actually matched a boot print on his chest to one of the correctional officer's boots. So, but a jury of his peers found all of them innocent, and but they don't work at the Department of Corrections. They were long gone before I got there. So, and again, pay attention to those little things, and that is where you come in, is making sure that's going on. You know, at this point in my career, I'm a firm believer in the role of the IG and the role it plays in maintaining public trust and maintaining integrity of an agency and maintaining an agency's reputation. Before I go any further, I'll kind of summarize what I've learned at this point. Number one, the Office of the Inspector General was not created just to find every mistake I ever made. That was a big aha moment too. And I realize, you know, that the audits that you do are for the purpose of making sure we're in compliance, making sure we're following the rules to help us avoid embarrassment down the road. You know, every day you can pick up the paper across this country and read about something in an agency, and I'm sure many of you probably assess that and say, you know, if they'd have done this, this, and this, they wouldn't be going through that. The IG's office plays an integral role in maintaining trust between your agency and other agencies. They need to know that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Between the governor and the legislature, that's critical. If you don't have their trust, and I'll share one more little story. I'm going to fast forward to Secretary of the Department of Corrections. 2 weeks on the job, I have to fear lucky for me, the session started early that year. 2 weeks on the job, I have to go before a Senate Appropriations Committee. And they start grilling me on everything at the Department of Corrections. Of course, they don't, I thought they pretty much could have assumed I was lucky just to know where my office was at that point, much less know all the answers to all these questions. But what I determined real quickly, and later on it became one of my priorities, was there was not trust of the Department of Corrections in anything we said in the legislature. There had been too many instances where they'd been promised one thing and something else was delivered, and over time there was just that tendency, and I understand it. I didn't like it because I didn't do it to them, but you know, I was the secretary. I had to accept it. So I made that one of my biggest priorities to try to change that. I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. The public. You know, sometimes even the most minor things, the public interpretation of those sometimes gets way off kilter. It gets exaggerated. And a lot of that's because sometimes there is a mistrust. They're thinking, well, this is what you told me, but here's the rest of the story. So your role in maintaining that public trust, I don't think you can understate it. I don't think I could repeat it enough as I stand up here. And then personal, selfish reason, I figured out pretty quick as a member of senior management in an agency, you guys played a big role in me keeping my job. There's been many agency heads that maybe ignored some of the things they were pointed out to them or told to them or whatever that are no longer agency heads. So you play a critical role in that. You know, I talked about being appointed the Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. August 24th, 2011. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, a job I truly loved and was very proud of. I had no desire to be commissioner, and that set very well with Commissioner Bailey because he liked being commissioner. I'm sitting there, I got 18 months left in drop. I'm comfortable in my job. I've made friends with the IG. Life's good. Telephone rings. It's the governor's office. said the governor would like to see you. Didn't really, you know, that's happened before, because FDLE gets called upon by the governor's office, and many times the governor personally, to investigate things. Well, you know, working at FDLE, you know, they've got their intelligence function, and a lot of that's kind of keeping track of what's going on around us. Well, I'd already started picking up there were some issues with the current secretary over at Department of Corrections. So I'm working on the assumption that I'm going down there to be told that they want us to investigate the secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. After pleasantries are exchanged, and I think it was still morning, late morning, the governor looks at me, and he did not beat around the bush. There was no gently breaking his news to me. He says, I want you to go over and be the secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. Now imagine you're going down there thinking you're going to be asked to investigate something, and now you're being asked to head up an agency that, you know, your only interaction with for years has been to investigate things that have occurred in that agency. So I immediately started telling the governor, well, I didn't think that was a good idea. I said, Governor, I don't know anything about corrections. I said, I've been a police officer for over 35 years, and my whole career has been about putting people in prison, but I never worried about what happened to them when they got there. He said, there's a lot of people that know what you need to do. That's not a problem. I said, well, Governor, I only got 18 months left and dropped. So I said, that's not fair to that agency to send me over there for 18 months. And you know, and then they got to go through another change in leadership in 18 months. Well, maybe we can figure out how you can stay. Of course, I'd studied this drop stuff. And I knew the only way I could stay past 18 months was to give all that drop money back. Now, even if I thought that was a good idea, my wife had already informed me just to go ahead and give her the names of my pallbearers. There was going to be a homicide. So at this point, I've kind of gone from curious to sheer panic. I'm running out of excuses. And, you know, as we're talking, and we're probably 20, 25 minutes into this, where I'm still trying to convince him. I'm even getting some other names of people I think are, you know, doing the job. And he's got his mind made up. So he finally looks at me, and he says, well, something you need to know. I've already talked to Commissioner Bailey, and if you're not willing to accept the appointment as the secretary, he's told me he will loan you to me as the interim secretary. So now my two choices have changed. I thought I could stay at FDLE, go to DOC. Now I got go to DOC or retire. So being a quick study, I informed the governor it would be my honor and my privilege to go over and serve as secretary of So my next question to the governor, what kind of transition are we talking about? Well, it was a real quick clue when he didn't look down at a calendar, he looked at his watch. And he says, well, we're meeting with the current secretary at 4:30 this afternoon, and we want you at that same time to be going in the door over there and letting them know you're the new secretary. I said, well, Governor, you going to give me a letter or something? He said, no, they'll believe you. So I'm lucky I wasn't Baker acted. You know, as I walked in the door and I'm like, hi, my name's Ken Tucker and I'm the new secretary here. Just looks at me. Fortunately, I knew someone. I said, can you call them and ask them to come down? So I described to them, and here we go. So now, one of the things I want to do, I do want to clarify my reluctance. It wasn't that I had a thing in the world against the Department of Corrections. It was those things I told you. I didn't know anything about corrections. I only had 18 months left in drop, and I personally did not feel that was fair to the agency. Now, I did at least negotiate consideration from the governor that I could bring someone in as my deputy and try to groom them to be named as the secretary when I left, to potentially avoid another transition of a completely different leadership team. And I'm glad to say that did work out. I brought over Mike Cruz from the Department of Corrections as my deputy, and ultimately the governor named him. The next day, and several Crown Royals later, I got over the shock and I started evaluating. Well, actually, I stopped asking myself the question, what have I done? And I started thinking, what am I going to do? And to kind of look at my situation, I'm sitting here as the secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections, the third largest correctional system in the United States of America. I have close to 23,000 employees, over 100,000 inmates in prison, and approximately 125,000 people under our supervision on probation. I used to think FDLE was big, but it's like mind-boggling as I thought of this. I was the 5th secretary in 6 years. Never, ever a good thing, an agency to have that much turnover in leadership. And the person I replaced was asked to resign after only 6 months on the job. And he rode into town on a white horse. He was here to save corrections. And I'm thinking, oh, goodness, I don't know anything about corrections. At least he knew something, and look what happened to him. And I've already told the Jimmy Crosby story. I knew that there were people there that knew that I played a role in arresting one of their former secretaries. I knew that I had spent most of my career, as it related to DOC, not coming over for friendly visits, but investigating criminal activities. So I was really curious how I was going to be received. You know, would there be any trust of me as their leader? The morale of that agency, I don't know that it's, if it's been lower, I don't know that I ever saw it, because they had just, I got there just in time to implement the second $100 million budget reduction. They had done another $100 million the year before. Of course, lucky for me, or I say lucky for me, my luck, the previous secretary hadn't really implemented those budget cuts. So here we are in August, and he's not really done anything. There's still people in positions that don't exist anymore. It wasn't a fun thing. Right or wrong, the reputation of the agency wasn't the best. I already explained the legislature, the public. I mean, there was a lot of mistrust of the agency. There was only a few people that I knew at the department, and I didn't know them very well, other than those that had been subjects of the investigations they've been involved in. I could go on, but I think you kind of get the idea. I've got my work cut out for me. I realized that early on. As I started looking at what needed to be done, I actually got a notepad, and as I thought of stuff, I started writing it down, because I was already starting to suffer from memory loss at that point. And it did nothing but get worse after that. But I realized one of the first things I had to do was take steps to enhance the professional image of the agency and to instill pride in as many of those 23,000 members of the department as I could. I also knew that I had to put some things in place to bring the integrity of the agency in check, to start working back toward a reputation of integrity. You know, I told you 2 weeks in I got invited to speak before the legislature. I promised them 2 things. Promised them that under my leadership they would see that the department would operate with complete transparency and with the highest degree of integrity in everything we did. Because I'll be honest, I think those 2 things are key. I think everything else you do falls into that. You know, you got to have the leadership skills, you got to have the leadership team, you got to have all those things. But without those 2 things, you don't stand a chance. So as part of implementing those things, I assessed the current, at that time, IG over there, and realized that, number one, I didn't believe he possessed the skill sets to do the things we needed to do. And that's not really a negative comment. I just don't think he had the background for that job. I don't know how many of you would want to trade places with Jeff Beasley, but I can tell you, he's got one of the toughest jobs in state government. You know, out of those 23,000 employees, they're not all law-abiding. Some of them are on the wrong side of the bars. And I said that publicly. And I told them it was my goal to sort them out and get them out of the agency, because they kill the reputation. So I went to our Chief Inspector General, Melinda Miguel, and I said, I want to make a change. She met with Mr. Beasley and quickly assessed, the same as I, that would be a good move, and so I brought Jeff Beasley on board. Now I brought Jeff over because I had worked with Jeff at FDLE. I knew him to be trustworthy. I knew he possessed a high degree of integrity. He was going to do the right things for the right reasons. I knew that I could trust him. And probably equal to all that, I knew he was a hard worker. And I knew that what we needed to do was going to be a lot of hard work. Brought Jeff over, kind of shocked him. Called him up, said, Jeff, I want you to come over, kind of like the governor did me. He's like, can I call you back? So shortly thereafter, brought Jeff over. I sat down with him and said, look, I got a lot of other things I need to deal with, but I want you to know, number one, I want this IG's office crackerjack. I want it, that we need it to do a great job. And I gave him the leeway to recommend policy changes, personnel changes, whatever he needed to do. He pretty much had carte blanche to go in there and make some changes. And I knew that was critical. That was step one in beginning the process toward establishing a reputation for integrity. Now, I wasn't naive. I knew that wasn't going to happen in the 18 months that I was there. But my goal was, you know, it had to start. And I don't know how long it'll truly take to get there, but I do think they're on the right track and headed down the right path to do that. I will publicly thank Jeff for coming over. I will also publicly commend him for a lot of the positive steps he and his team's already taken over there. As I said, they've got a tough job, and there's a lot of people that aren't pushing the boat in the same direction. Every time you're trying to row it one way, they're throwing the anchor out trying to keep it from going there. So, and I could spend the rest of the afternoon, you know, forget about the 29 years at FDLE. I could probably spend the rest of the afternoon telling stories about my 18 months at the Department of Corrections. Before I left FDLE, I'd coined the phrase, and I'll use the PG version title of my book I was going to write. The title of my book at FDLE was going to be, You Can't Make This Stuff Up. After 18 months at DOC, I now figured out I need to write 2 volumes of that book. You can't do it 1 and 2. And DOC would have been a whole book in itself. You know, before I move on, I do want to clarify one thing, though. I don't want to leave you with a negative impression of the Florida Department of Corrections. I found this out after I got there. The vast majority of the people that work there, hardworking, they want to be professional. They have actually struggled to be professional with a lot of the things that have gone on over the years. And the vast majority of them want to do the right thing. And they want to be proud of where they work and what they do. So I think it's key to being able to show that what we were trying to work toward can be done, because there's people there to get on board to help do that. Much of that reputation of that department is based on a small group of people. And that's true most anywhere. You know, the old one bad apple, you know, there's so many little sayings you can say about it, but the moral of the story is, if you don't weed out the wrongdoing, if you don't pay attention to the little things, your agency could fall into an equal mess of dealing with those kinds of issues. I will tell you this today, though I tried to talk the governor out of it, I cherish and I'm very proud of the opportunity to have served as Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. I left there a better person than when I went there. Before I went there, don't even talk to me about recidivism or rehabilitation. They're all crooks. They'll always all be crooks. When I got there, I figured out that this strategy is not going to work. There's 100,000 people plus in prison in Florida at any given point in time, in the state prison system. Of that 100,000, a little over 30,000 are released each year. Now there's another 30,000 coming in to replace them, so you don't have job securities there. But the recidivism rate basically is slightly more than 1/3 of them are coming back to prison. So if you're releasing 30,000 a year, that means 10,000 of that group's coming back. Well, each year that kind of compounds itself. Plus you got the new criminals that are grooming themselves out there. So it was like a cycle that couldn't be broken. And so I'll be very candid. And a lot of my old cop buddies, you drinking the Kool-Aid over there or what? But I made re-entry one of my priorities at the Department of Corrections. Because there are some of those groups. Everything's got to be simplified for me. And I always say, well, I'm going to talk 50 minutes. If I get too long, let me know. There are those that they're first-time offenders. They're going to do their time. They're going to get out, and you'll never see them again. They learn their lesson. On the other side, you got a percentage. No matter what you do, they're coming back to prison. They are criminals. They are career criminals, and they're always going to be criminals. There's nothing that can... At least nobody's found anything that I'm aware of that can change them. In the middle, you got the group that can go either way. So we need to spend some, if we want to reduce the cost of corrections, and this was a big debate the governor and I had, because he kept wanting to cut the budget. I'm like, unless I start starving them, Governor, that budget, I don't know what it is. I think it's going to maintain this year. But it's right around $2.2 billion. Sounds like a lot of money. Till you start feeding, clothing, providing medical services, all of those things that are, and it would shock you just the things that go on every day within those prison systems. So I just want to make sure you understand. What I said today was not in any way meant to be a criticism of the department. I was just showing that as an example, and one that I have personal experience with, what happens when you fail to pay attention to those things. And I'll kind of try to summarize all the points I've made. There are many negative consequences to not having a strong IG. One of those is a lack of trust and confidence by the governor and the cabinet. Another is a lack of trust and confidence by the legislature. And I already told you how uncomfortable they can make you over there. I seriously considered running for the legislature after I retired just so I could go over and get even with some of them. And I could talk a lot more freely now because I am retired. So. And then most importantly, a lack of trust and confidence from the public we serve. I think that's key. We owe that. We spend their taxpayer dollars, and I think without those things, I don't know of any agency that can perform its mission. I'm a firm believer that government and public officials must operate with complete transparency and the highest level of integrity. I think that's a standard, that's a baseline. I don't think it's way up here. That's the way everybody should do business. As Inspector Generals, your responsibility is to guard that trust, and make sure that it's maintained. And I'm not saying everybody else is against you. A lot of your agencies, there's a lot of people make mistakes. That's, and even finding those is a good thing. You know, by the time I retire from FDLE, where's Nancy at? There she is. I actually shared with her, I said, look, I embrace audits. They make us better. Because we find out where we're making mistakes and we got an opportunity to improve. I don't know that everybody truly ever believed that based on things I said earlier, but I truly did believe that. How do you accomplish this? You function at the highest level of integrity, which I don't know that I've ever met anybody in an Inspector General staff that didn't possess that level they needed to do their job and be well at it. Training. You got to know your stuff. You got to be good at what you do. And just listening to the reports here today, this is the fact that this association exists and all the positive things you got going on, it's obvious you're doing all those things. And then just as importantly, you have to demonstrate strong leadership. I know from experience, sitting in some briefings where Mr. Dennis is presenting some things that maybe me and the commissioner didn't really want to hear. But he had to stick to his guns and make sure we heard it. And that's your responsibility to your agency head. You can't give him the sugar-coated version or her. You have to give them the truth. You have to give them the facts. And I've always encouraged that. It's like, just lay it out. You know, let's deal with it. Let's don't try to hide from it. You know, when it's just like any other mistake. You can try putting it under the carpet, but at some point somebody will look under there and see everything you swept under there. So, let me ask this question. How many of you, as Inspector Generals, have the ability to have direct contact with your agency head? Those of you that don't, you need to go back and work on that. Because I think it's critical. I think it's very, very important that you have the ability. The other thing I think it does is building that relationship. You know, your agency head may not have had the benefit of all the learning experiences I had and may not truly understand what your role is either. But you can make them better. If you go to them and say, what are your priorities? What are the things you'd like to see us look at? And help develop that audit plan. Help develop those reviews that you're going to do. Now, granted, you got to have those things that you got to decide too. The things that, you know, maybe everybody's been asked to look at. But try to develop that relationship where you can give them your input and you can seek theirs as well. Understanding their priorities will make you better in your role as the IG. I see Mr. Kerwin back there. He could probably give the next part of my speech for me, but upon my retirement from the state of Florida, I accepted a position with the United States Attorney's Office. And the position is I hate the title because it's more of a job description than a title, but it's Law Enforcement Coordinator. I can't do an acronym because if I go around telling people I'm the LEC over there, nobody get it. And then you say Law Enforcement Coordinator. I had a good friend of mine, he said, what are you doing now? I said, work at U.S. Attorney's Office. What do you do there? I said, I'm the Law Enforcement Coordinator. He laughed. He said, leave it to Ken Tucker to find the only job that nobody had ever heard of before. So, my role is multifaceted. I play a role in trying to provide training to local law enforcement and play a role in trying to identify grant opportunities and make sure people are aware of them. Any of you that are interested, because we serve state agencies as well, I'm trying to learn the whole grant game. That's a complicated area. Any of you that ever dealt with it, but I'm getting access to all these different databases where they give me notices of grants. So at the end, I'm going to give you my cell phone number and I'm going to leave some business cards. So if any of you are interested, I do have an email list I've created, so as these opportunities come up, I can forward them out to you. But there's a couple of other things I can help you with. I know many of you get into some very, very sensitive type investigations of things that you've uncovered. If you run into some of those and you would like to have federal assistance and you're not sure who to call, where to go, call me and I'll help facilitate getting you in touch with the appropriate federal agency. Or you can call Tom Kerwin and he'll do the same. Probably do better. He'll probably get the appropriate agency more often than I will at this point. The other thing I can assist you with is if you have a case and you'd like to seek federal prosecution, we can at least get you a meeting to sit down with our prosecutors and go over what you have and determine, is it appropriate for federal prosecution. One thing I will offer, and I'll let Mr. Beasley give testimony as to the value of it, but I brought Jeff over and sat down with him, the supervisor of the criminal division and the chief of the criminal division, and started describing the role of the IG. And to be honest, I think there was misunderstanding on both sides, but I don't think they truly understood. At some of the agency, the IG also conducts criminal investigations. And granted, there's a concern there. Prosecutors are always worried about a group that does both the administrative and the criminal investigation, because you can't mix the two. You got to keep them separate. But they were convinced after Jeff came over and told them how they were doing things at the department, and I think it's really already opened up the lines of communication, and especially with the Department of Corrections. Without getting into any specifics, there are many rural areas of this state where the Department of Corrections is the primary economic generator for that area. And when you start trying to go to trial in that county, generally everybody that's on the jury is related to somebody that works in a prison. They are somebody that works in a prison, or they run a business that makes money off people that work in prison. So it's kind of hard to get a really unbiased jury pool and prosecute some of these cases, i.e. the Valdez case that I talked about earlier. Jury acquitted the first one. We never even tried the others. We gave up. The first one acquitted him that fast. It was almost embarrassing to be a part of this whole thing that led to that. So, but if you're interested in a meeting like that for your agency, if you give me a call, I'll set it up and bring you over and introduce you to them. If nothing else, it's just a good contact to have so that if you reach that point, you know who to call. So I was going to give out my cell phone number, but I know everybody doesn't have pads and all that, so I'll give out the cards with my office number, and you can call Jeff. He's got all my numbers. But be glad to help you in any way I can. You know, I joke around. I worked at FDLE 29 years. Had 18 months left. Governor moves me over to Department of Corrections. 18 months later, I didn't take the governor's advice and give all the drop money back. I retired. And then I started working at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Well, it dawned on me the other day, I had the same job for 29 years, and now I've had 3 jobs in the last 20 months. I said, it's supposed to work the other way around, but anyway. I want to leave you with this. As a former agency head, as a former state employee, and as a former taxpayer, or former.
Was that a confession? That was a confession.
I would love to be a former taxpayer, but I haven't figured that one out yet. If anybody's got the secret. But as a tax-paying citizen of the great state of Florida, I do appreciate what you do. I know you've got a very difficult job, and I know it's one that many times is not appreciated. And it's seen more by me in my younger days as bothersome. You know, you're bothering me. Don't bother me with those details. So, but I do appreciate the role you play in preserving the integrity of our state government and our local government as appropriate, because it is key. I think, you know, a lot of the mistrust today is because we haven't done a good job at that. And I think with what you guys are doing and the professionalism, I know many of you are seeking accreditation and all those things, I think it just is going to go a long ways in reestablishing that. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. You know, I said when Chris called, I wondered what I'd talk about. And I don't wear a wristwatch anymore. Obviously, I figured out how to say a few things. But if you're left with wondering what in the world did he just say, then I was right when I talked to Chris the first day. I didn't know what I'd talk about. So, but I thank you for the opportunity. I know the answer to this used more often than not, but I will open it up for questions if anybody's got any questions of me. Seeing none, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Before you get away, we may not be in the rainy season yet, but we will be soon, and we have a small token of appreciation, which I guarantee falls under anybody's guidelines for gifts. This bears the seal.
Tom, can I take this?
This bears the seal of the Association of Inspectors General, and we'd love to have you carry it around with you.
All right, thank you, sir. My pleasure.
Thank you. Two reminders before we adjourn. The first reminder is please mark your calendar for our June meeting, which is the second Tuesday of the month. It should be on June 11th. If anything changes, we'll let you all know. Of course, we'll be meeting. The second is that our annual memberships in the association expire every year in June and need to be reinitiated for the new year. So you can renew your membership with the chapter for $35 on the Association of Inspectors General website, or for $75. You can become a member of the National Association and the chapter as well. So remember to do that before the end of June, if you will. Right now, the Florida chapter has 309 members, which is almost half. Which is almost half of the entire strength of the association nationwide. So we should be proud of ourselves for that. So please rejoin. Okay, and with that, unless anybody's got any other comments, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.